Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for Pell Reinstatement, What Colleges Need to Know. As a reminder, ASL interpreters are available to pin, or you can click the interpretation button on your Zoom toolbar and select ASL to populate the interpreter in a separate window. Closed captioning is also available through the Zoom menu bar. The presentation you're viewing has been prepared by and is the property of the Middle States Commission on Higher Education, or MSCHE. Reproduction is expressly prohibited without prior written consent from MSCHE. For permission requests, email MSCHE at president@msche.org. For any questions about an institution's accreditation status, or for additional information about MSCHE's standards for accreditation, requirements of affiliation, policies and procedures, and applicable federal regulatory requirements, you should contact MSCHE staff. Always seek the advice of your institution's assigned vice president liaison with any questions specific to your institution. This presentation is not intended as a substitute for professional advice from MSCHE staff, and use of the presentation does not guarantee any specific accreditation outcome. We're delighted to have you here this afternoon. Joining me today, I am Dr. Sean McKittrick, Vice President of Institutional Field Relations with the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. Joining us today is Chris Agans, Executive Director of New Jersey Scholarship and Transformative Education in Prisons Consortium with Rutgers University. Danielle Cox, Director of Education, Maryland Department of Corrections, and Dr. Belinda Wheeler, Senior Program Associate on Vera Institute's Institute of Justice's Unlocking Potential team. Our learning objectives for this afternoon are several. At the conclusion of this session, participants will understand how the U.S. Department of Education's final Pell Grant reinstatement regulations provide colleges, accreditors, and corrections with an opportunity to ensure high-quality prison education programs. Second, to understand how corrections and consortiums have an important role to play in the PEP process, including in the required stakeholder group. Third, learn how Middle States is moving forward with its guidance to help colleges and their partners implement and maintain high-quality prison education programs. And finally, fourth, to have access to resources from multiple stakeholders, including the U.S. Department of Education, Middle States, and the Vera Institute of Justice.
Linda, you're muted.
Apologies, my friends. Thank you so much, Sean, for that. And thank you all for the opportunity to be with you today to discuss this important moment. So here you see we've got this celebration slide. This is a really exciting time. Pell Reinstatement is almost here. Thanks to everyone in the community that has done so much work to make this possible. There's still a lot of work to be done, to be sure, but I'm confident that moving forward, we will have the infrastructure in place to ensure that Pell Grants will never be removed from people who are incarcerated ever again. So on this slide here, I wanted to provide the community with a visual so that you can see that whichever route your institution is taking towards Pell Reinstatement, everyone must eventually become an approved PEP, otherwise known as a prison education program. So on the left, we've got new and existing non-second chance Pell members. You must first become an eligible PEP in order to draw down Pell funds from the Department of Education. And those current second chance Pell colleges that have been asked, to join the revised experiment. The deadline for that was May 18th. They should be hearing from the Department of Ed shortly with information on whether or not they have been accepted to become a revised second chance Pell experiment college. And then if those colleges decided not to join the revised second chance Pell experiment, then they would be ceasing programming in compliance with the Department of Education's regulations. All right, so just in summary here, like I said, any college that wants to draw down Pell Grants for people who are incarcerated must eventually become a prison education program. For current second chance Pell colleges that are accepted into the Department of Education's revised experiment, you will have an extended timeline up to June 30th of 2026 to become an approved PEP. And for our purposes today, we know we have a diverse audience with us today. For our purposes, we are going to focus on PEPs and the information that all of you will eventually need. So what is a PEP? What are its benefits and who is eligible to participate? As you can see here, any person who is incarcerated, regardless of sentence length or conviction type, is eligible. The benefits of expanding additional location definitions to PEPs are many, and that includes that there is going to be, students are going to be provided with additional quality measures, which includes the oversight by the college accreditor, and federal government protections, including Pell Grant restoration should a PEP cease operations. When it comes to locations for PEPs, we must note that while PEP, the acronym, says prison education programs, it does indeed include more than prisons. And we've got here from the regulations that a PEP is a federal, state, or local penitentiary, prison, jail, reformatory, work farm, juvenile justice facility, or other similar correctional institutions. So it's important to keep that in mind as you move forward. Listed here on this slide are the basic eligibility requirements for becoming a PEP under the new regulations. I'll just summarize them here. That you must be a public or private nonprofit institutions. For-profits are not eligible to become PEPs. It must initially be approved by the relevant oversight entity. The college has not been subject to an adverse accreditation, state or U.S. Department of Education action. It's approved to be operating in the best interests of students at the close of the 2-year kind of probationary period, that the college offers credits transferable to at least one institution in the state for which, students could be, transferred, satisfies requirements for licensure or certification if such a credential is a requirement into the profession, and does not offer a program designed to lead to a licensure or professional certification that they would be barred from, like people with criminal convictions would be barred from. So those are important criteria that the audience will want to keep in mind moving forward. Determining eligible PEPs is a critical part of Pell Reinstatement. So this is a slide that we've listed here that provides a very short summary of the PEP pre-approval process. So for these 3 boxes that we have here, this is important for the colleges to be doing each of these 3 things. So first, the college must reach out to an oversight entity, which is otherwise known as corrections. That could be the state corrections, a local jail, and or Bureau of Prisons, for example. The college must connect with corrections to discuss potential programming for students. They may complete a formal application, and there needs to be some level of documentation that the college obtains from corrections, which is documentation that the college is then going to provide to both accreditors and the U.S. Department of Education moving forward. So the colleges essentially must talk with corrections to begin with to make sure that they're moving forward with this, which makes sense. The second is the accreditor. So for a lot of you that are on the call here today, middle states, you'd be reaching out to MSCHE to let them know that you have established some kind of relationship with a correctional counterpart and that you're planning on providing educational opportunities to people in a carceral setting. The college will then complete any required accreditor documentation, such as a substantive change additional location application. But again, you'll want to connect with middle states to find out exactly what process they will want you to do moving forward. You'll also get some kind of documentation from your accreditor at that point, and you'll then be taking that material that you receive from the accreditor and the material that you receive from corrections to then apply to the US Department of Education to become an approved PEP. We're waiting, it should be any day now, it could be any day or any week now, that the formal PEP application form is going to be released by the US Department of Education, and that's what colleges will have to complete as this final stage of the pre-approval process. Now, I just want to underscore here the importance of the accreditor. You know anyways that the college accreditor is a very important stakeholder in any college programming that takes place. You know, that is definitely the same with the PEP process. You need to know that an evaluation by accreditors of at least the first PEP offered at the first 2 locations, regardless of a correctional facility's proximity to the college campus or method of delivery, and that those site visits by accreditors will occur as soon as practicable, but no later than a year after initiating the PEP at those first 2 additional locations. Now, that's information from the regulations. Now, again, you'll want to reach out to your liaison with middle states to get further clarification. But just know that, you know, modality does not determine site visit status. And if you're, you know, most of you are colleges that have already had, you know, some site visits and things like that, it could be with this introduction of these new PEPs that an off-cycle visit may be needed by your accreditor. But again, you'll receive further guidance from your liaison. Whoops, excuse me. Now I wanted to share the determining eligible PEPs post the final approval that we have here. So assuming that your college does receive notification from the US Department of Education that you have been kind of pre-approved to become a PEP, then you will officially start as a PEP, drawing down Pell Grants for students in that correctional facility. During years 1 to 2, the college will be launching that program and operating as that PEP. You will be starting to implement the best interest criteria, and your accreditor will complete that site visit of, again, this PEP. And then at the end of the 2-year period, the oversight entity will complete an assessment of, you know, how the college has been moving forward with this programming, including that best interest criteria. So that's, you know, that kind of like 2-year timeline that you need to be looking at, where, you know, you'll be having these conversations with your oversight entity and determining whether or not your program will be allowed to continue in this space after that 2-year approval. And then also note that, again, assuming that you do, you know, receive the approval of the corrections partner and you continue to be in compliance with your accreditor and the US Department of Education, that there'll be ongoing review that you can expect. For example, we've got here, you know, that there will be this institution's ECAR that the US Department of Education will issue to you. The oversight entity may require annual reporting or reviews post that 2-year review, and that PEPs will want to keep documentation of any of these reviews on file, because as was written in the final regulations, the US Department of Education must provide updates to Congress on the how things have been going with the PEP process. All right. The best interest of students criteria that I mentioned earlier, these are things that colleges are going to be trying to move forward with and trying to meet all of these best interest of criteria before or as close to that, 2-year review period, is that the college offers comparable experience, credentials, and turnover of faculty than what you would see on a traditional campus, that there is comparable transferability of credits, that there is comparable academic and career advising while the students are incarcerated and in advance of reentry, and that there is the ability for students to continue their education at any location of the college post-release. We know that some students may not complete their academic credential prior to being released back into the community. So it's important for them to be able to continue, that the educational journey doesn't end just because they've completed their time in incarceration. Finally, I wanted to list here the opportunities for community engagement before I then turn into the conversation with my awesome panelists here today. We do know that PEPs do not happen in a vacuum. Students enrolled in a PEP have needs beyond the college classroom. The final regulations explain possible roles for an optional advisory committee and the mandatory requirement of having relevant stakeholders providing feedback to corrections throughout the application and review process, as you can see here. So for that relevant stakeholders, we've seen from the final regulations that it must include representatives of students who are incarcerated, organizations representing individuals who are confined or incarcerated, state higher education executive officers, accrediting agencies, and additional stakeholders as determined by the oversight entity. So that's just a brief summary of these regulations, but now more importantly, I wanted to turn it over to this great conversation we have planned with our colleagues. And I wanted to bring Danielle Cox, Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, into the conversation with me. Thanks for joining me today, Danielle. And I wanted to kind of kick it off with a question to you, my friend. What is your role that you do have at Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services?
Good afternoon. I'm the Director of Education. So that means I oversee basically everything that has to do with education at the Department of Public Safety in Maryland. That would be our adult basic ed, GED, career technical education, reentry, and higher education program, making sure that the Department of Labor runs our adult basic ed GED programs and does an amazing job. So really coordinating what they do, and then also what our higher education programs do, our second chance Pell programs.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, Danielle. You definitely got a lot of balls that you're juggling in the air, my friend. This is definitely not an easy process with everything that you're doing. So thank you so much for that summary. The next question I had for you is, can you provide a summary of what Maryland DPSCS, has learned so far during the Second Chance Pell experiment?
Sure. I kind of want to break it down into kind of like some challenges and benefits with that. I actually talked to a couple of my programs when I was thinking about this answer for this. One of the challenges, of course, is the FAFSA, especially on paper, right? That has caused a lot of issues. Anything is filled out incorrectly that would then go back to the college, would actually have to then come back into the institution, have to be filled out again, go back to the college again. So it's like a constant process because, we don't have the access to the technology, at least in Maryland, that some other states might have. We've made some inroads there, and I'll talk about that a little later with the technology, but there's still some problems. And then, the approval process with financial aid office and verification. So that seems, the FAFSA process has always been a very big challenge, but it has gotten better throughout the years. Also, the defaulting with the loans and ineligibility. A lot of our incarcerated persons, which is what we call them in Maryland, IPs, have defaulted loans and often don't qualify for Pell Grants. So having to figure that out, rectify that situation. Often, we try to tell them to talk to US DOE, but the problem with that is they can't email them. it's hard to call them. So what do? We try to write a letter. That takes months trying to get a hold of them to figure out what's the situation, what's the, issue there, and trying to rectify that situation. So, that's always a constant challenge that we have to try to get them eligible to actually qualify. But then some of the benefits that we've seen actually come out of it throughout the years is, well, now Pell Reinstatement, right? Like we've come to where we've had this experiment, and we've come to the point where now we actually have this great thing that's coming down the line, right? That we are now, hopefully we'll see some more people that will be eligible to qualify. And then technology. And I kind of like to throw the technology in with pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID, because pre-COVID, desktop computers, pretty much the extent of our technology, right? And then we had COVID, we're shut to everything down. And pretty much we had to go into technology, Zoom classrooms, bring the guys and women into the classroom, do Zoom classes with the instructors, right? That was something we never thought of before COVID. And now post-COVID, we're doing that. We're bringing in laptops. We're doing servers that connect back to our campus with secured VPNs, just things that we never thought of that we could do in a correctional institution before with like JSTOR and EBSCO. So it's like really has opened, it's sad to say that something like so horrible could really open up, kind of our world, right? But it really has, kind of changed it. But then another thing that we've seen is just the need for students to have that same experience as their peers on the outside, making sure that, from the awards that we give them to the classrooms, making them not look like a prison, to having them write for like the school newspaper. I mean, the one that's actually on the college campus, and knowing that their articles will actually be in those newsletters. It's important for them to feel like they actually belong to the college in which they're enrolled to. So like making inroads there so that they actually feel like there's that connection back to the college. So I would say that, we definitely have seen like that growth there. And I know since taking over, I've been in corrections in Maryland a long time, moving up in different roles and coming over to this role. I've done a lot to make sure that I am having biweekly calls with my Second Chance Pell directors to go over those challenges and successes also, and making sure they're sharing with each other some of the things that they have going on so that they can support each other, and making sure they're learning from each other also.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, you're right. There's been a lot of, there's definitely regular challenges, in this space, like you'd mentioned with financial aid and eligibility here. But then we also saw with COVID a lot of, disadvantages in ways, but as you said, some surprising advantages that have really helped, set the stage for us for Pell Reinstatement, with education and, the programming available to students. So thank you so much for that, Danielle. You had mentioned the PEP approval process just briefly when you were speaking there. I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind kind of unpacking that a little bit more for us and kind of sharing with the audience. I know every state is going to have, a PEP approval process as they're, moving forward, having conversations with colleges and other stakeholders. But would you mind sharing what Maryland is doing with that PEP approval process, what it looks like, and how and why have you started to incorporate the stakeholder feedback process from the start, which is really exciting?
Absolutely. So because I do have those biweekly calls with my Second Chance Pell directors, I kind of brought them into the mix and said, if you had a say in this, what would be your first thought, when we talk about this best interest determination and stakeholders and that sort of thing. And they were like, well, we kind of feel like it's unfair to have these stakeholders come in 2 years later and make a decision about our program without ever knowing anything about our program. And I'm like, wow, you have a point. So that kind of resonated with me about having this group of people who need to really know more about this program from the get-go, right? So I decided that I would, back in November, it's like when the regulations, everything was just starting to come out, was to take and create this advisory committee of stakeholders that would actually be at the ground level. They would actually approve the programs as they were coming in the door. They would take and actually evaluate them at 1 year. And there's a reason for that. I want those programs to know how they are doing, whether good or bad, so that at 2 years, they're not being told, oh, by the way, bye, because you've done something wrong and we don't want you here anymore. And then also then at that 2-year mark, making that best interest determination so that they are having that, that interaction that whole time period. And I had brought this to my secretary, who loved the idea and the approval, just deciding to make sure that they had that much larger role. They would go out, visit the program, talk to the students, do surveys of students, interview them, that sort of thing, and making sure that they actually just were on the, the ground floor there with the program from the start. I also had decided that I was going to create a proposal document that each of the institutions, the colleges as they were coming in, that they would have to fill out. It's quite lengthy and they might not like it too much, but it is quite lengthy, but there's a reason for that. I want to make sure that those programs that we are accepting are one, that the curriculum is something that our students are going to be successful in, that they are something that they are going to get jobs in later on, that this is something that is going to be a worthwhile program for them, that is going to be of interest to them. We're doing surveys of all the population to make sure it's something they want. We decided that the 10 people in that committee, so that advisory committee that is made up of only 10 people, and it's, by the way, it's called the Maryland Higher Education and Corrections Advisory Committee. So we have 2 incarcerated persons on that committee, one of which went through one of our second chance Pell programs. The other also was previously incarcerated, went through a program, but he has he's executive director of a program in which his program is behind the fence, and they offer help with FAFSA and doing things to help younger students really want to go to college. They kind of tutor them and help them, give them support in learning why college is important and that sort of thing. I have the academic coordinator for correctional education, Maryland Department of Labor, the Maryland Longitudinal Data Systems representative who gives me labor market and wage data, so that when we look at that degree program, I can actually see, is this something that's going to lead to jobs and down the road, 5-10 years from now? Is it something that the last 5 years has led to something that is people are getting these degrees and having good paying jobs and wages? We have the Assistant Secretary of the Maryland Higher Education Commission. Middle States also is represented, and of course, representation from our side. So, a wide variety of people who can bring stuff to the table that will be beneficial when actually looking at those programs and those proposals. The first step is to come to me. I'm like that kind of thumbs up, thumbs down to say whether or not that program, do we already have it? If you're coming to me with a sociology program, we already got one, and our guys can transfer in and out of different facilities. So I don't want 5 different sociology programs, right? So, I don't want to be saturated with too many of the same degrees. So we want to make sure that whatever you're offering, we look at that labor market data and the wage data at that very first meeting so that you can have that data, that information right away, so that you can that institution can make that decision right from the get-go and have that information. So I'm like kind of their thumb up or thumbs down at that very first meeting. And I kind of give them that first letter of support at that first meeting. Then they go to MSCHE, our Maryland Higher Education Commission, to get their approval. After that, they come back to us for the advisory committee. That's when they turn in that proposal document, goes through our advisory committee for approval. Our secretary signs off on it. That's when we start our MOU process. MOU gets signed off, then they go to Middle States for the accreditation process, and then after that to US DOE. And then for the US DOE approval. Once they get the US DOE approval, then of course we're in the door.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. And I really appreciate you kind of showing, the makeup of that committee, but then also like that process. And, I think it's really great that you've been proactive, with all those different stakeholders from, from the start, because like you said, it's complicated. And I think, it's something that you don't want to do at that 2-year mark. So I think, your organization being super proactive and trying to bring, those diverse stakeholders into the, conversation, I think is really important. So thank you for kind of sharing, shining a light on that process for everyone. Before I turn it over to bringing Chris into the conversation, I just wanted to lift up 2 other things real quick. You had mentioned, and it was really great to hear it, how you're really centering the voice of people who are currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated as part of your process. I think that's really so important as we're moving forward with that. I wanted to see if you had any kind of other things that you wanted to mention on top of those great examples that you gave. And then also, before we finish up, I wanted to see what kind of like aspirations that your organization might have as we're thinking about the future of Pell Reinstatement.
Sure. Not only do we have the 2 previously incarcerated people, as we have to on the committee, but we are seeking out, the voices of those who are currently incarcerated through those interviews, those surveys. We also have one of our previous secretary and our current secretary continued it, is our lived experience committee. This is a committee, I'm the chairperson, but everybody else on the committee is someone who was previously incarcerated, whether it be in Maryland or some other state. And their whole purpose is to tell us what we are doing wrong and how we can do it better. And one of the things that we talk to them about is education and this process. And this will be one of those things like, hey, is there something we could be doing better? And they have given me some pointers here and there, right? So I just feel like their voice is so much more important, if not, or so much as important, if not more important, than all of our voices, right? They're the ones there that are actually, the ones that are benefiting the most from what we are doing. They are the ones, the incarcerated students that are participating in the PEPs are the ones that we need to make sure that they are getting that college education that they deserve while they are incarcerated. So we want to make sure that we are doing whatever we can do to make sure that we are supporting them in their education, absolutely, and that we are getting them that equitable access to that college education. And that aspiration, kind of quite simple. I want to make sure that every single one of my facilities has a 4-year degree program and at least one AA degree program in each region by 2025. I want that if a man or woman in our facilities cannot transfer due to some reason to a facility, they have access to some sort of program at the facility they are in. Most of them can transfer, but if they can't, they at least have something in the facility that they are in. I want to make sure we have a variety of programs available to everyone also. The amount of colleges I'm in talks to right now, I believe that is possible. And lastly, I want to make sure that we have equitable opportunities for the students to enjoy a full college experience so that they're getting the same education and skills that they would be provided on the outside, inside the prison also.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for Danielle. It's just wonderful to hear. I get the advantage at Vera to kind of hear of all the stuff that you're doing, but like sharing it with the larger community, I think is so important as we're really moving, with this national, to just be moving forward with Pell Reinstatement. So thank you so much for that, Danielle. I'm going to move the conversation now over to colleague Chris Agans from NJ-STEP. And Chris, I'm so glad to have you on this call with us today too, my friend. As we know, consortiums are such an important stakeholder in PEPs moving forward, and NJ-STEP is just an amazing, organization that's been doing so much work in this space. So I'm really glad to kind of shine a spotlight on the work that you've been doing. So Chris, my first question to you, my friend, is, what is NJ-STEP really briefly for the audience, and what are your roles in the organization?
Sure. And hi, Belinda, and good afternoon, everyone. So again, my name is Chris Agans. NJ-STEP is a consortium of colleges and correctional partners in New Jersey who work together to provide a coordinated pipeline of college programming in all of New Jersey state prisons. That entails Raritan Valley Community College's RISE program, who offers an associate's degree in liberal arts as our entree point. Rutgers University Newark, who offers a interdisciplinary BA in Justice Studies, and most recently, Drew University is offering a pilot MA certificate in leadership as well. And we also incorporate the contributions of colleges who don't necessarily matriculate students, like Princeton University as a primary contributor, that offer instructional support and other resources to our students as they transition home. I'm the executive director of the NJ STEP administrative team. So that's the team of counselors, both on the inside and the outside, who glue together the work of the consortium, or try to glue together the work of the consortium, providing, on the ground resources and support, recruitment and advising on the inside, as well as a really robust reentry support community outside across the state. Our vision is that every person who is incarcerated in the state of New Jersey who would like to pursue a college education and has the credentials to do so has the ability to do so. So that's what we're aiming towards.
Yeah,
I also oversee the BA component. So one of the components in the pipeline is the BA in Justice Studies. So I also oversee that. I wear two hats kind of in my roles here at NJ STEP.
Yep, excellent. Yeah, you do a lot of great work, and so does your team, Chris. I'm so glad to have you on this call.
Thank you.
So you've been boots on the ground in this space for quite a long time, Chris. Would you kind of share with us, what you've learned so far from the Second Chance Pell experiment?
Sure. So as just echoing Danielle, the environment is very challenging to replicate what a college campus entails, right? We expect a lot of engagement and freedom of movement and access to information and technology from our students on a college campus, and to translate that into a prison, which has, significant security concerns and constraints, creates a lot of challenges for us logistically and administratively. There's a lot of extra effort that it entails in terms of translating inside. Things like ensuring parity with campus degrees, transferability between degrees and programs, reducing overlap of offerings, like Danielle was speaking of, also creates significant logistical and space constraints. So it requires a lot of folks at the table. You really do need solid partnerships between colleges and corrections to be successful and efficient in this space. But mainly, I think what we've learned is that there's a tremendous untapped talent in our prisons that men and women inside want and will rise to the high expectations of a solid degree program. I want to highlight that in New Jersey in particular, although I suspect in prisons across the country, there's a long history of self-advocacy, self-guided learning, and peer-led learning that served as the impetus for NJ STEP and formed the foundation of what we do. And we think of this as a partnership with the incarcerated population and the correctional system with mutual benefits for all the stakeholders there.
That's great. Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I just have a couple more points. In addition to notable reentry outcomes and a cultural shift in our prisons, our college campuses have really benefited tremendously from our involvement inside. Students that they bring their lived experience and expertise that sometimes contradicts conventional wisdom in a college campus and in an academic environment. We've learned to be better teachers, how to make our campus more accessible to not just the formerly incarcerated, but the larger justice system impacted community at large. Our students have come on campus and won national fellowships. They enhance the research that our faculty does. They've published white papers and journal articles in partnership with faculty members. They do guest lectures in classes. They start clubs. They join actions. They ultimately just raise the bar for their more traditional peers and enhance the learning experience for their more traditional peers as well as the rest of us. I just want to highlight, also, we've learned that this is an opportunity to push boundaries rather than set them, right? So we've had students who've launched careers and taken leadership roles in every sector. We've got VPs in private industry, educators, social workers, community organizers, nonprofit leaders, right? People conducting research, working on things like sentence reform in New Jersey, in particular as research assistants, environmental justice in our inner cities, bringing their lived experience to the reentry programming that we're providing. We have a certified nurse, half a dozen engineers, entrepreneurs who've launched a wide variety of successful businesses. And then ultimately, we've learned on the flip side, though, that this work takes significant effort to be intentional and to keep student voices centered. to avoid recreating, carceral ideology, recognizing ways in which colleges and academia in general can be exploitative. So we have to be very conscious of how we approach this work as well.
That's awesome, my friend. My actual next question was going to be about, how does your organization center the voices of people, who are formerly or currently incarcerated? And you just did it right there, my friend. You're really showing, by having the students come onto the campuses, providing feedback, giving lectures, things of that nature, and then, what they've been giving back into the community. I wasn't sure if there was anything else that you wanted to share, about that.
I do. I think it's important to cite that we engaged students early in our founding charter. We incorporated students who had college experience inside through a number of boutique programs, and we retained the tenets that they brought to the table into our initial founding grant. Even today, those are kind of sacrosanct for us. And we also are very intentional about hiring from the alumni pool and offering leadership development for alumni out of the program to work for NJ-STEP and ultimately lead NJ-STEP's initiatives. We run focus groups inside and out, open community meetings and encourage engagement. And we also have an alumni tutoring pool that serve as advisory boards inside, right? So the alumni out of the program continue to feed back into the way in which we think about supporting our students.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's just so heartwarming to hear, how the students, Danielle had talked about what they're doing, what NJ-STEP is doing. This is just so integral. So I'm hoping that the audience that's listening to this webinar can really kind of lift up and think about how they might be able to, make sure that students are kind of front and center, of these discussions moving forward. Before I turn it over to Sean, my friend, Chris, I wanted to check with you, what are some kind of current, advice that you have for current second chance Pell or prospective PEPs, and then also that question about aspirations that you have would be really great to hear about both of those. Thanks.
Sure. So I guess from what I've learned as an existing SCP program, I think it's important that we engage new stakeholders outside of our comfort zone as we move into this process. I know for us in particular, we're constantly at risk of, ongoing groupthink and complacency and thinking that we've got answers. And then when we bring in someone who's kind of outside the ecosystem to kind of look in, they point out something that we missed, and it's extremely helpful to do that. We've also been really lucky to have alumni to kind of guide and feed into our founding charter and ongoing programming. But I think also it'd be a great, I'm encouraging new programs and existing programs to look at alumni as a possible feedback loop. And I want to point to the FICGN, that's the formerly incarcerated college graduates network in particular, as a great place to start. It's a national organization and, are working on founding, state chapters, a great place to look to get that kind of feedback. I also want to encourage folks to continue to insist on equity, especially as we move into this more kind of routine space around Pell. Maybe it's a good time now to re-examine your admissions and your retention strategies to ensure that we're not replicating disparities that we already have in our classrooms outside on the inside. It's a very fraught place in order to kind of replicate those things. Come to NCHEP, which is the National Conference for Higher Ed in Prisons this November in Georgia. Ask questions, take notes if you're new to the game. Don't take this lightly. Don't get into this lightly. I think you want to move slow if you're starting a new program. Engage with students first, not after you've designed a program for them, because they're going to tell you how to design a program for them. Get the whole college on board, right? If you've got a financial aid office that's resistant or an admissions office that's resistant, work that out now, not after you've already kind of gotten underway. And set high expectations, right? Our students are very adamant. They don't want pity grades. They don't want prison degrees. They want the degree that's offered on campus. And sometimes that requires maintaining really high expectations, despite the challenge that our students are facing. I'm sorry, you also asked me just about looking forward. I'm just really excited about the stability that, Pell will offer, or this version of Pell will offer the field as a whole. Ideally, that will lead to a more robust research agenda. I think one of the things that we're really missing as a field, especially coming from a college that does research primarily as a research institution, we don't have enough research that talks about best practices and outcomes in the field. And I'm hoping that will naturally follow the increased stability here. But then I think most importantly, more opportunities for employment, including our students who are inside and are now gaining credentials and may have significant time left on their sentences. What does this mean for their work life and careers? More opportunities for student governance inside, and more directly impacted students and alumni moving into leadership roles in both policy and in direct service in the field.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris.
Sure.
So now I wanted to turn it over to Sean. You know, as you all know, another equally important stakeholder in PEPs are accreditors. And, you know, it's my pleasure to bring Sean back into this conversation. And Sean, a question I kind of had for you just in general as you start preparing to share your slides, my friend, is what information would you like Middle States to share as a critical accreditor of second chance Pell institutions?
Thank you, Belinda. You know, Middle States has been involved in prison Pell initiatives for quite some time now, and we are excited about this opportunity to participate as part of the regulatory triad. A reference that you may want to look at is the US Ed site on prison education programs, question and answers. But what we're particularly excited about is that, one, this has to do with Middle States' strategic planning initiatives with regard to advocacy, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that sort of thing. Some things we really think about have to do with comparability of programs in terms of rigor and quality, of course, compliance with federal and state regulations, of leveraging interactions with various actors to ensure quality, and to better define and to pursue pathways. There are institutions that have been doing programs of this sort of type for some time, answering the question about what if they wanted to participate, what pathways are available, something that will come up in our July 1 document. And of course, ensuring that the process is clear and transparent. So our next slide has to do with the importance of looking at our latest guidance document, which the last date I have is May 2nd of 2023, and then a new document coming out on July 1. But we do ask, next slide, please, thank you. We do ask that you do please stay tuned, because there are multiple steps to the process as we interact with our partners, as we interact as a member of the regulatory process. It is also important to follow Middle States processes. So on this slide, we have steps in the process that are referred to in our May 2nd, 2023 guidance document. And as we move along, we are very, very much involved in creating pathways in the next month or so as we roll out our July 1 process. So please stay tuned as we work with you through this process. Some things to pay attention to, though, I've mentioned comparability. Just so you know that in the past, we've looked at issues of comparability. So there are certain things, if you could, next slide, to pay attention to. One of many have to do with comparability of curriculum and services as Standard 3 requires. I've done a lot of work on information literacy. I think Belinda would probably say a lot. One of my big topics is information literacy, because that's part of our general education requirements. Faculty qualifications and appropriate instructional rigor. Third-party arrangements is already in the standards, so it enables us to speak to our partners with regard to our standards. Compliance with U.S. Department of Education and state guidelines is part of Standard 2 and part of the documentation and information that is supplied to us. And of course, compliance with institutions and regulators, policies, procedures, and regulations.
Okay, so thank you so much for that, Sean, for that really important information that we wanted to share with the audience today. So now we've got a little bit of time for Q&A, and after we've done with the Q&A, I wanted to share a bunch of different resources that Danielle, Chris, I think Sean, and Vera have for you, and also from the US. Great. Thank you all so much for that. So just quickly, a couple of slides that I wanted to share with you all. And again, this slide deck will be made available, as Sean had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So you'll be able to click on these links. The Maryland has the guidelines for drafting and submitting a PEP proposal to them. So you might find that really enlightening. We've also got a list of NJ STEPS resources that Chris had mentioned, including the Formerly Incarcerated Graduates Network, the Alliance for Higher Education in Prison. There's a couple of links here for the Department of Education, including their email address if you have questions that you'd like to bring to the Department of Education. They also published a Beyond the Box document just last month, so you might find that really interesting. And then also that FSA Partners web link that's available there as well. And then Vera, please feel free to go onto our website. We've got a link there where you can see a lot of different studies and resources that we have. So now I'll turn it back to Sean. Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for participating in this process, and all of our participants today. Each one of you has provided us with such useful information that I'm still thinking about, and I appreciate that your efforts very much. You can follow us on social media at MSCHE.org, and we thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.